This is IA Forward, your playbook for success as an independent insurance agent. Here to help you knock it out of the ballpark are your hosts, Shane Tatum and Tonya Lead.
Welcome to IA Forward. Shane, does your phone give you the top news and top articles to read when you swipe? Because I know things are different in the Apple world than it is in the Android world.
Oh, it gives me the latest news, and it gives me more stuff than I really want to think that it gives me, because I know it's always listening to me, and that's the creepy part. Yes, it gives me the swipe right or left. It gives me the latest stories, and it gives me the stuff it wants me to read.
Yesterday, when I did this, it gave me this article that was the 75 KPIs, key performance indicators, that you should be watching to know if your business is successful. 75.
Just 75.
I couldn't even get to 75. My brain doesn't comprehend having to watch 75 different things at once.
I can't even do 5, much less 75.
I'm actually just wondering if it was an AI written article, because any human being would have known that another human being really can't do that.
If it just seems so far out there, then it becomes obvious that it's probably not human generated.
This kind of reminded me of something that my dog Maribel did yesterday. During Mardi Gras, her Aunt Mitzi caught her this Build-A-Bear wolf from a float. And what was really funny is we had no idea that this was a Build-A-Bear thing. We just thought it was a stuffed animal. And Maribel was chewing on it a few days later, and I noticed it had a little BAB patch on its hand, and I'm like, that's a Build-A-Bear, and looked it up, and it's some kind of commemorative special edition $200 Build-A-Bear that my dog has now eaten the eyeball out of, and I had no idea of that. But I digress. Her stuffy was on the sofa, and Maribel, weighing less than 4 pounds, can't get on the sofa by herself. In her brain, she knew that if she ran, it created momentum. She's figured this out. If she runs, then she can jump higher and further. She still can't jump up on the sofa. But we were rearranging some things in the living room, and so she, using her 4-pound brain, which is about the size of a walnut, was running from behind the sofa, turning 2 corners, and then jumping, which, having to turn 2 corners, of course, stopped her momentum altogether. So she wasn't doing what she thought she was doing, but she was doing a lot of stuff to make it happen. And it made me think that's what a lot of business owners do. There are things that we do, and we're busy, and we're running, and we're turning the corners, and we're turning another corner, and then we go to jump, and we've got no momentum. We're not really building anything because we weren't running in a straight line. This happens to not a lot of people. It happens to the majority of us.
That was a really good story to get us to which KPIs should we pay attention to. It's very much about how we respond and react to different things. And we take this busyness, especially in the marketplace that we've had for the last 1.5 years, and we are so preoccupied that being busy means being successful, that bleeds over into the checkpoints of how is our business doing? How are things progressing? Are we making the traction that we want to make? Are we going down the right paths? And we get caught up in what other people are doing or what everybody else says is the right thing. And your business as an independent agency is pretty unique. And yeah, there may be segments of your business, or your business may look like some other guys, but you can't just take the thing that somebody else says is their indicator that they watch and just automatically apply it to yours. The mixture of your business matters. If you're heavy personal lines, if you're heavy commercial lines, if you're 50-50 mix personal commercial, if you write some life health med sup. I know agencies that are 30, 30, and 40 or something like that. They're not more than 50% life health med sup, so they're not a life health agency. But when you mix it all up, they have a fair amount of life and health business, but they're still a property casualty dominant agency. All of these things matter when you're feeding what should I look at. And look, it's not simple to arrive at what's the right thing for me, but the result should be that you find this simplified area. It's definitely not 75 KPIs. It's 3 to 5. And it's really important that you find the KPIs that matter to you. And also understand that your KPIs may change over time as your business evolves and grows and changes.
Let's talk about initial benchmarks. Now, this is a term that we started using at Integra a few years ago to help agents get to their goals as quickly as possible. Some guidelines that we put in place because people were asking for that. And prior to that, we let agents grow at their own pace. And we still let agents grow at their own pace. But we created some specific numbers to help agents because some of them weren't growing as fast as they wanted to, and having someone help them set goals helped. And then some of them were blowing past those benchmarks, but still not feeling as though they were successful.
As an independent agency that was born out of an independent agency, and there are networks out there that were born out of captive agents going independent and saying, I'm going to bring my friends with me. And then there are agency networks that were born out of independent agencies that started to become attractive to captive agents, producers on how to start agencies, which happens to be who we are. We were true blue independent agency from day one. We've never been a captive agency organization. It's just not in our DNA. You have to start there and go, okay, we would have these exclusive or captive agents want to start an agency, partner with us, and then say, how much production do you require? And do I have quotas? Okay. And they started asking us questions of, do I have quotas? And we're like, no, you need to decide what you want to do, how much you want to produce, how successful you want to be. But quotas never registered with me. It took me a while to sort of transition from my history and my understanding from an independent agency standpoint to helping individuals that were moving from the captive channel over to the independent channel. And there just was this disconnect, and there was just this ignorance to what might be required. So we came up with benchmarks, and the benchmarks replaced or became our substitute for these quotas. And the benchmarks were not a scenario where you didn't make the benchmark and so we are terminating you or anything like that. You didn't make the first benchmark. But the benchmarks are not going to make you rich. This is the other thing that we talk about with our partner agents in our agency network. The benchmarks that we created are designed for survivability. If you make these benchmarks, we think you will survive and you can at some point grow and flourish. If you don't make these benchmarks, that's your indication that you're not going to survive. Understanding where our benchmarks come from.
And let's talk about the word survivability. That's important in what you just talked about. If you're trying to start a property and casualty independent agency on the side, we don't really believe that is survivable. You may be able to come in and you may have a successful P&C agency side hustle. And if you do, I would love for you to reach out, message me, because I want to talk to you, because I would love to pick your brain and figure out how you're making that work. And that very sincerely, and Shane does too. We would love to talk to you and find out about that, because we have not seen where that works. People that are doing this as a side hustle from our past experience has been a hot mess express. And so when we talk about survivability, we're talking about survivability, being able to make a living and a decent living doing this as a full-time business owner.
Yeah, I do not think the independent agency model is an investment model. I do not think it is a side hustle. It is the Chick-fil-A of insurance. It is a owner-operator concept. And if you're not owner operating your P&C agency, then you're not probably going to be successful or even survive for that matter, especially if you're starting from scratch. Now, can you purchase an independent agency and it, quote, survive and you get a return on your investment? It depends on the management team. It depends on the size of the agency you buy. But we're talking from the perspective of starting. Chick-fil-A's always been one location franchise, and you could buy a franchise if you can get in the door, and they're very specific about who they will sell a franchise to, but you have to be an owner operator. Whereas other franchise fast food like McDonald's and other places, they're more into area development, multi-unit franchises, but the Chick-fil-A model of owner operation is what I equate to for the independent agency channel. And it's just because of the skill set that's required that you have to be in it every day. You have to understand what's going on, and you can grow and reach a place in your future where you become a non-salesperson. You become a more of an operations president or CEO of your organization. You may eventually at some point be able to become like a chairman, a non-day-to-day manager of the business. That's going to take some scale. That's going to take some size, and that's going to take a full-blown management team, and it's going to operate a little differently when you reach that point. But for the 95% of us, it's an owner-operator model that I really want to hit home, and I really want to just make sure that folks understand out there, especially if you're thinking about starting an independent agency. I want you to have that owner-operator mindset first.
What benchmarks should a new P&C agency owner be looking at?
My first that I always go to is policy per customer, which is really hard for new agencies to get their head around in the beginning. And we're talking the very beginning. We're talking day zero. In the beginning, you're trying to pour on revenue. I get it. You're trying to get the revenue flowing. You're trying to get the pipeline going. And how many sales am I making? Or am I driving enough business? Am I getting enough prospects? All those things that go into what I would call basic sales organization strategy. It's really important that you have your business owner future mindset in place, because it's really hard to unwind from bad early decisions. We see agencies that go through this. I talk to agencies every week that find themselves in this spot. And so policies per customer is a big indicator for me, especially in a newer agency, because if you're running that policy per customer ratio of say 1.3, then we know you're writing a lot of monoline policies. Okay. We know that you're writing a lot of policies and your client ratio to your policies is very low. But if you're writing and running a policy per customer ratio above 2, that means on average, you're getting more of share of wallet from that customer. And so the real question is, in the beginning, is it better to have 200 policies and 150 clients? Or is it better to have 200 policies and 75 clients? The math on that for me is the 75 clients are going to be easier to service than the 150 clients. You've doubled your service load at the lower policy per customer by simply writing policies. You're simply just a policy seller. But if you're a client acquisition machine, if you're out there after clients and you're after 2, 3, 4 policies for that client, I like to call them full-time clients. You're not allowing that client to split their coverage needs between you and 1 or 2 other agents. You're setting yourself up for failure. Your mindset is, I'll get the home, I'll get my foot in the door, and then I'll get the auto later. The problem with that is early on, let's say in your first 3 years, you don't have the processes in place to go back and cross-sell that auto. And you think you're going to do that, but you don't have the processes, the automation. You're not really thinking along the terms of, okay, this is how I'm going to write the home first and then get the auto later. And so you're better off saying, sorry, can't do that. I need all of your business if I'm going to do this.
When my husband and I bought our house last year, and of course we needed insurance down in Florida, and our organization does not write home insurance in Florida. I actually had this conversation with myself ahead of time and practiced what I was going to say when talking to agents about why I could not be their full-time customer and why I couldn't necessarily move my commercial insurance. I couldn't necessarily move my vehicle insurance because I do work for an insurance org. I just didn't work for an insurance org that necessarily wrote homeowners in Florida. And I was so shocked because I drank the Kool-Aid of what you're saying so much that the shock that I received when I talked to 3 different agents, not a single one of them asked me about my vehicle insurance, and not a single one of them asked me if I needed an umbrella or it was all about getting me a quote back for my home, and that was it. And I had practiced. I was ready to have this conversation, and it was just such a shock for me. I talked with captive agents and I talked with independent agents because in Florida, you get insurance where you can. And I've really found it fascinating after everything we talk about being a full-time agent that nobody wanted to do that.
Florida is an anomaly, so full disclaimer, fully admit that. We've got captive agents down there that have access to independent agency companies because the captive company doesn't write home in Florida. However, it's not such a different world that you can't practice this. The core problem here, we are allowing the tail to wag the dog. We set up these referral sources with the real estate industry, the mortgage companies, and we are serving them, and we are not necessarily serving our customers because we're afraid if we do something that messes up that home sale that they will stop sending us referrals. So I get that. But what we don't understand as an industry, as a channel, is that we are hurting our future service load. We are hurting our future margins when we do this, okay? The other thing that we're hurting, and this is a major marketplace problem for us right now with the way that the market has gone over the last 18 months, is if you have a multi-line carrier that writes auto and home, and you are writing monoline home with that carrier, you are headed down a path of destruction because that carrier wants balance. That carrier does not want to be heavy monoline home or even heavy monoline auto, unless that carrier is Progressive. If you're in a major Travelers, Hartford, Safeco, if you're in a major multi-line carrier scenario, those carriers want balanced books. And what we're also allowing to happen to us, which is contributing to the same policy per customer ratio problem, is that we're splitting things up. We're taking and we're putting that home with one company A and that auto with company B. You may get away with it for a short period of time, but once your book starts to become unbalanced, you're going to lose that appointment eventually.
Beyond policy per client ratio, what should someone be looking at in the first 5 years?
This one's a little dicey, but revenue per employee is another one within retail agencies that I think is really important, or spread per employee. So that would be your revenue minus your labor cost for your support staff. There's really cool tools and services that have been developed over the last 5 to 8 years that's become a big part of our industry that have helped here. And my point of bringing this up and saying this is a little dicey is when you're starting off, you're not thinking about hiring people. I understand that. But at the same time, there's going to come that point where you need to hire support staff, because if you started this agency, you're the salesperson, you're the rainmaker, you're the one that's driving revenue. So most of the time, you don't need to hire more salespeople, first and foremost. The first thing you need to do is hire somebody to support your sales effort. Some of this can be done in intervals where you potentially look at a virtual assistant before you look at a full-time support person. That virtual assistant can do some rabbit chasing for you. They can play some whack-a-mole for you in non-licensed activities. They can do some things around chasing e-signatures and making sure that you get everything taken care of once you get the policy written, etc. That is like a half step there, and that can help you with your revenue per employee. And then it's just one of those situations where as you go to add that first service rep, what is that revenue per employee indicator showing? I love the idea that it should be about $100,000 in commission revenue per employee. Don't take yourself out of this formula. What most agents do is they go, I'm one person and I'm generating $300,000 a year in revenue and I have a VA. Okay, include the VA. don't cheat yourself. What is the profit margin on revenue that I want to make in my bottom line? And I've thrown out 20%, or make a 20% profit margin. When you're a solopreneur and you are past survivability and into this really driving revenue, and you're maybe making $250,000 a year because you haven't hired anybody yet, you think you're king of the road because your taxable income is $200,000 and your gross income is $300,000. Okay, you're 67% profit margin. You can't do that. You got to include your payroll. And now give me your profit margin. Okay, don't cheat financials just to give yourself a glow and make yourself feel better. Be real about running a profit and loss statement and a balance sheet and run a business, and not just give yourself that pat on the back about where those indicators are. Now you're cheating the indicators.
Let's talk to our agents that have been doing this a while. If you've been in the agency business 5, 7, 10 plus years, how should those benchmarks be shifting for you?
What happens is that we find ourselves growing into what I would call no man's land. And that is this sort of self-described area that I came up with years ago, where you have to make a decision of whether to retreat or whether to fight and push through. And no man's land is this space of revenue and staffing need where you're not making more money, but you're doing more stuff and you're generating more gross revenue. Okay, so your profit's not jumping, your personal income's not jumping, but your revenue's jumping and your people are increasing, hence revenue per employee, hence policy per customer. And most of the time, that policy per customer ratio is lower than it should be when you find yourself in no man's land. And I find that agents that have a higher policy per customer ratio can skip no man's land. Okay, so these are my terms, my words that I come up with. Let me just go a little deeper with that. Real life stuff. So if your agency runs a 1.65 policy per customer ratio and your peer runs a 2.2 policy per customer ratio, and you're both doing the same amount of revenue, your 1.65 policy per customer ratio agency is going to have more servicing because you have more clients. But the more clients you have, the more servicing you have. It's not the more policies you have, because those 2 or 3 policies per customer clients don't seem to change vehicles as often. They don't seem to refinance their mortgages as quickly. They just don't seem to have the same servicing intervals that client out there that you just have the auto with. They're always doing something, trading a vehicle, refinancing their mortgage. It's like this constant thing, and you're doing all this servicing work for the same revenue, and this peer over here is doing less service work for more. So you're leaving money on the table at 1.65 versus 2.2. And so as your agency grows, when that 1.65 policy per customer ratio agency hits no man's land, they had to hire a bunch of people to keep up. So now your revenue per employee is down because every time you hire that person before you really need to, you squash the revenue per employee. And now you're sitting here and you're going, why am I not making more money? We need to grow more revenue. We need to sell more policies. And then you just get caught in this cycle. And what you really need to do is you need to either segment that monoline business, or you need to cross-sell the heck out of that and get that 1.65 ratio up above 2. And then you're not adding more clients, you're adding more revenue without adding more clients.
Going back to my days of selling radio, it's the same thing. A $350 client would drive me crazy because that $350 to them was a lot of money. But a $3,500 client, they would have questions here and there. But then what if I looked at a $35,000 client or a $300,000 client? Those clients rarely needed anything outside the norm. And the other side of that is if a $300,000 client called me at 8 o'clock on a Friday night, I didn't mind taking that call because I knew there was something they needed. I knew that it was worth my time. And it just made sense that okay, this is the client that I'm going to make the exception. But when the $350 client would call me at 2:00 in the morning on Sunday morning, it just made me want to scream. And did I appreciate the fact that I had all of those clients? Yes, of course I did. But those full-time clients are the clients that you want to have. Looking back, if I would have turned down that $350 client, because I can promise you I didn't make any money off of it. And especially if I looked at it at an hourly rate, I definitely didn't make any money off of it. If I would have stopped saying yes and stopped pouring so much of my time into those little bitty clients, how much money would I have made going after the bigger clients that were there?
Since so many of our captive agencies come over to the independent agency channel as personal lines driven agencies, the only way we can do that is by getting all of their business. I know agencies that are averaging $6,000 and $7,000 premiums per account per year by being at 2.3 policies per customer. They got the auto, they got the home, they got a toy, or they got an umbrella. We're not even going down the path of life insurance. But when you look at that 3 or 4 policy account, your revenue on that account could easily be $1,000 a year versus that single home policy at $2,000. And now your revenue is $280, $300 on that one account. So you're leaving $700 a year per client on the table. And when you look up and multiply that times 100 clients, well, now we're at what, $70,000 a year in revenue loss? That's huge on a $2 or $3 million agency. You can't allow the tail to wag the dog here. You are leaving hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table in revenue. And that hundreds of thousands of dollars, if you're profitable already, is bottom line stuff. So if I made it even more of a realization, let's say that you've got $5 million agency, and let's say that because of your policy per customer ratio, you're leaving $200,000 of revenue on the table because it's 1.6 versus 2.2. $200,000 in revenue on a profitable agency that hits the bottom line on EBITDA valuation. You could be leaving $2 million of value on an agency acquisition.
Let's take that number down to the difference of what it makes for us this year, because we may have younger listeners that are just starting their agency, have started their agency in the last 10 years. They're in their 30s, they're in their early 40s. They're not thinking about selling yet. Let's talk about what that looks like for them and what goes in their pocket this year.
It's backing your way into that calculation in a way. Year 1, year 2, year 3, you could be leaving $10,000 or $15,000 on the table. Then you could be leaving $25,000 on the table, and then $30,000 on the table as you go year 1 to 2 to 3. The thing is, we're mistaking activity of selling policies with maximizing revenue per client and revenue at the end of the day that's going to go into your pocket because you're a solopreneur day one, more than likely. If you're starting from scratch, you're a solopreneur a lot of times. And so it is directly going to impact your pocketbook in year 1, thousands of dollars. Because no matter what you do, you're never going to outsell on a single policy basis, a multi-policy basis approach. You're just never going to do it. And if you do it in year 1 and you prove me wrong, in year 2, your retention on that year 1 business is not going to be great. And now you're just churning because it's not sticky. Once you sell that single policy, they have no loyalty to you. It's not hard to move a single policy. It's a pain in the rear to move 4 policies. It's a pain in the rear to move your entire account. Think about your banking relationship. Who wants to move their checking account? Nobody wants to move their checking account. If you have a savings account or a money market account or a CD, and then you're like, oh man, I really don't want to move all that. It's a pain. It's the same thing. In an independent agency, you have to think like the customer. It's a pain in the rear to move all of your business. And so once you get bigger share of wallet, more policies per customer on your ratio side, you're making it harder for that customer to leave you.
What he's saying in Tonya terms is don't be Maribel. Have a direct shot, know what you're doing, and make it happen. Don't try to be running around the sofa, turning 2 corners, and think you're going to get where you want to go.
I like to think of it as shoot with a rifle, not a shotgun. Aim specific. Be specific. The Maribel analogy is extremely good. For those out there that need a little more rifle, shotgun analogy, that's it. If you shoot with a shotgun, it's just going all over the place. If you shoot with a rifle, it's specifically what you got to aim for.
I'm going to leave us with one from Michael Jordan. You have to expect things of yourself before you can do them.
That's good. Attitude's a choice. Make a great one.
Bye, y'all.
Ready to get the ball rolling with your independent agency? Learn more at IntegraAgent.com. That's IntegraAgent.com. Thank you for joining us on IA Forward. Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now or learn more at IAForward.com.